Namaskar. Today we are going into the English lecture number 12, and we are still working with the new frontier. That is, we will be working with globalization, the new frontier. Right? We did a lot on globalization, but today we will try some theorization of globalization, meaning what conceptually, how has international relations looked upon globalization. The first person that we get in is David Held. David Held defines for us how globalization is popularly defined in international relations. The widening, deepening, and speeding up of worldwide interconnectedness in all aspects of contemporary social life, from the cultural to the criminal, the financial to the spiritual. States enjoy less and less control of their destinies and are buffeted by forces outside their borders and beyond their control. Third, it consists of those processes that knit people everywhere together, thereby producing a worldwide interdependence, featuring and the rapid and large-scale movement of persons, things, and ideas and goods across sovereign borders. Right? So you have the three major ways of looking at globalization and how globalization has come to be defined. Now, what are the features of globalization? First is the spread of communication technologies, your internet, your social media. The very fact that I'm able to sit in one area and speak to all of you makes a huge difference, right? So that is the first thing, which shrinks the role of the geographical distance, the global village. Second is globalization is built on the proliferation of powerful computers and microelectronic technologies that help to communicate virtually instantaneously by email, cellular and satellite telephones, and fax machines, and to move vast amounts of money and information via technologies. Third, it involves the spread of satellite technology for TV and radio, as well as global marketing. Overall, these technological revolutions overcome physical distance in politics, economics, war, and every way of life that we live today. What are the features? Features is the spread of knowledge and skills and an explosion in political participation. See, today you're having protests. Earlier, people never knew if protests started in one place, it would spread to another place. But today, it spread so fast, and everybody, there are bloggers and others who literally control these movements. The spread of mass media. Most of you know that this year there's elections in the United States, and most of their conventions are being done with these features. It's not a real convention where people are gathering. So the spread of mass media and the communications and transportation revolutions enables ever more people, even in remote corners of the world, to be informed about the world around them, form opinions about events, and get involved in politics in ways that were unimaginable until now. Internet has become the most important tool of all in facilitating the exchange of news, the dissemination of information and propaganda, and the coordination of activities, because it is relatively inexpensive, expensive and accessible. Blogs, as I told you. A personal online journal that is updated and intended for general public consumption. Bloggers are beginning to influence people around the world by transmitting information and opinion to the internet. The global triumph, so first is technology, that especially information and communication. Second is capitalism. The emergence of global markets that transcend state borders. See, anywhere you go, it is literally, you can get goods from all over the world. and limit state control of their economies. When the Cold War, with the end of the Cold War, free market capitalism as an economic ideology was said to have triumphed over the, command control economies of the communist regimes like China and Russia and other less developed countries. And most of us also know that China adopted the market system or capitalism in its economic policy. Its triumph has been accompanied by the expansion of transnational companies or TNCs, the rapid movement of investments, the shifting of jobs and industries offshore, the proliferation of global networks of production and distribution. You also have the emergence of world cities and the emergence of an urbanized economic elite. So first is technology, second is economics, third is culture. It is accompanied by the spread of global culture, originally Western, featuring shared norms based on mass consumerism. Consumerism is a norm that values the acquisition of material goods. The homogenization of mass culture can be seen in everything from dress, diet, and education to advertising and the spread of belief in human rights. Samuel Huntington argues that modernization, economic development, and urbanization and globalization have led people to rethink their identities and redefine them in narrower and more intimate communal terms. The popularity of religious fundamentalism reflects this backlash because they think that Western values are threatening their culture and their way of life. 5, the spread of English as a global language. English links elites across the globe such as Latin and French did in earlier epochs and enjoys a special status in 75 countries. It is spoken as a native language by 300 to 400 million people and as a second language by many more. Everywhere the demand to learn English is intense because it is the language of commerce, science, and technology. Many more native speakers of Mandarin and Hindi are there, but English is the language of trade, business, and services as they globalize and democratize. So here, after culture, we're talking about the globalization brings with it a very important language, that is English. 6, the spread of democracy. This is a little controversial, but still the globalization theorists think that the spread of democratic norms, the global triumph of liberal democracy is premature. Globalization is witnessing a growing acceptance of individual rights, including that of choosing of one's own leaders. Democracy remains fragile at best and in some regions non-existent in others, and is violently contested by those who don't have what we call free elections. Then you have terrorists who don't support either secularism or democracy. Then the spread of civil society. You have a lot of proliferation of NGOs, which has led to suggest that a global civil society is beginning to coalesce. Advocates of this is that such a society will champion a political vision of a world founded on non-violent, legally sanctioned power-sharing arrangements among many different and interconnected forms of socio-economic life that are distinct from governmental institutions. NGOs have their agendas and developing countries find them intrusive. So NGOs do come in with a lot of agendas, and in several countries they do interfere even with the things. So the question is it really a global civil society, or is it trying to play on the agenda of the dominant? Then you have the question of liberal democracy. What is liberal democracy? It's a political system in which the authority of elected representatives to make decisions is governed by the rule of law under a constitution that protects individual rights and minority rights. Then you have the other called cyberspace, the electronic medium of computer networks in which online communication takes place. The growing deterritorialization of economic activity as production and finance increasingly acquire a global and transnational dimension. Now, are really states weakening? Here, I would like to quote James Rosner, a very eminent political scientist and international relations scholar. He says that globalization has led to the weakening of states that are pulled in different directions in a process of a combination of integration and fragmentation that involves the simultaneous impact of globalization and localization. And here I would like to draw your attention to two books by Susan Strange, that is The Retreat of the State and States and Markets. Now the question is, in the post-Cold War period, because of globalization, will the nature of the state change? And if it changes, will the so-called modern liberal Westphalian state bring in a post-Westphalian order? With the loss of absolute and exclusive state-centeredness, the post-Westphalian era is one of constant innovation and experimentation with notions of power, political structures and institutional dynamics underlined by the losing validity of traditional definitions of power in purely military and political terms. Over the past 3.5 centuries, the principles and practices of the Westphalian Treaty, 1648, gradually spread from Europe to the rest of the world. The Westphalian order seems to have assumed a vital importance for three main reasons. Why? First, it secularized international politics by divorcing it from any particular religious footing and anchoring it instead on the tenets of national interest and reasons of state. What is the second main factor? It prompted sovereignty, the legal doctrine that no higher authority stands above the state except that to which the state is voluntarily assents. So if you see very clearly, sovereignty, is it a new type of hypocrisy? Third, it accepted a conception of international society based on the legal equality of states. All sovereign states possessed the same rights and duties. They had the right to manage matters within the boundaries without outside interference, as well as the duty of abstraction from intervening in the whole affairs of other states. So thus the Westphalian Treaty marks the birth of the nation state, itself the primary subject of modern international law. Now from this, if we are in a post-Westphalian order, then are we having the retreat of the state? Nation states are enmeshed in a complex network of transnational governments that includes corporations, banks, intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations. In sum, the world today is being shaped by forces that challenge the Westphalian state-centric international politics. As nation states begin to share more power with non-state entities, international relations is increasingly becoming two-pronged, not just state to state, but between states and on the one hand, and subnational and supranational actors on the other. So what are we going to now have? We are going to have a new form of anarchy. The rising importance of government without governance, without government bears witness to a new form of anarchy. It involves not only the absence of a higher statutory organization, but also encompasses the disaggregation of regulatory powers prescribed by law so as to allow for much greater facility, innovation and experimentation in the development and application of newer ways to comprehend the disparate nation states of the world. Now, what is the post-Westphalian order? First is you have the agency of the transnational corporation. The increasing importance of the global economy, global interdependence have forced developed states, or what we call, in the words of Richard Roth can say, trading states, to concentrate on increasingly their share of the world economy. Every state wants to become a stronger economic power. See, now during the COVID, the Chinese are flexing their muscles because they are an economic power and they hold the chains of supply and demand. So it is very important that after COVID-19, most of the other countries that China threatened have realized that they have to break this internet, this demand supply chain to teach China a lesson. The problem is more serious from the moment when the most important decisions on an economic, financial and developmental level are taken not by states, but by groups of power, by holding companies, multinationals, lobbies and so-called market, demonstrating how global corporations have the capacity to circumvent after the domestic policies of states. States do not have the requisite power, authority or resources to operate their resources. Hence, political power of the TNCs increases because they are operating at global distances. Now, what are the challenges to the TNCs? While the degree of global economic challenges to national sovereignty varies from country to country and assumes a far more complex dimension in the poorer third world nations, one thing is clear, that fundamentally the Westphalian notion of nation-state sovereignty is being hampered and redrawn, if not in peril. As states struggle to redesign their sovereignty in a global world, mega corporations have begun to assume an ever more stateless quality, leaving them less and less accountable to any government anywhere. The problem facing individual governments in a post-industrial global economic order is how to benefit, generate and maintain a mutually beneficial pattern of cooperation in face of competing efforts by governments and non-governmental actors to manipulate the system to their benefit. Meaning, see, today the state is not the only actor. You are having other actors who are competing for this center space in international relations. Non-governmental organizations come third after TNCs. Beginning with the last decade of the 20th century, NGOs have substantially proliferated international relations system. The growth of non-governmental organizations have in large part been fueled by the perceived inability of both the domestic and international political consequences of rapid changes in science and technology, growing economic interdependence and political fragmentation. Now, do NGOs have an agenda? Yes, they do. Who often play a pervasive role in global affairs, endorse well-defined goals, mobilizing networks, framing issues of public consumption and promoting new norms in the area of society such as human rights, minority rights, medical assistance, refugees, environmental protection and disaster relief, humanitarian or development assistance, especially in war-torn kind societies. So NGOs have become very controversial. It's no longer that they are only there for the good work or to create a better civil society. Most of the NGOs that have come in have become very intrusive and they have an agenda of their own, and that can be against a nation's agenda as well. Now, if you see, majority of the NGOs aim to indirectly influence the decisions of the state actors to bring about changes in policies of governments or international organizations by means of what? Demonstrations, which you see today in America a lot. Media pressure, recruitment of political leaders and opinion formers. Now, global security, from this, what is the other thing that has become internationalized? It is global security and terrorism. The extent of the debate on global security arose in the early 1990s as a US-led political response to what was viewed as a slow, arduous process of the UN as the world's conscience keeper of peace to strategize military options in troubled regions. Yet US-sponsored defense doctrines encapsulated in the global security paradigm pushed ahead for radicalism in the United Nations, or the United Nations Security Council may remain a complicated venture and especially very tedious and long. So the operation of such military adventurism with easier exit policies for states unwilling to carry on so long drawn and protracted conflict with terror groups is always self-defeating. Like for example, where as of now, many people believe that in Pakistan, which is one of the countries that sponsors terrorism, that uses terrorism as an instrument of foreign policy, it is so difficult. Though recently we did Balakot and others, but that was because only now there is a new normal in India vis-a-vis both Pakistan and China. So if you see clearly, military force or military power is one of the ways to do it. Now the war and terror, as most of you know, started from 2011 after the attack on the Twin Towers. So the US as the hegemon power or as the hyperpower is seeking to shape an efficient and reliable global security network, ideologically reordered, or to lend clarity and purpose to an unclear global politico-military architecture. But as mentioned in earlier, recent military actions by the US and its allies, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the phased military pullout that has followed, suggests that the US would have to settle for a far less fulfillment of the approved objective it had originally sought out. Now, another major thing which comes with globalization is the responsibility to protect. And this responsibility is called humanitarian intervention. And most of us know that in the post-Cold War, it has been one of the most controversial principles of international relations. So the debate is very symptomatic that whether whom do you protect and for in whose right is it. So it relates apparently to nothing less than a demand for a coherent sequence for the transforming impact of human rights as the grammar of universal convenience. So the caste principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states is a touchstone of traditional international law under the state-centric system, is replaced in the contemporary post-Westphalian order by the actual legal duty to intervene, and with force to oblige other states to implement basic human rights. So unequal distribution of power. You know, in international relations, every state is not as powerful as every other state. So the question that comes in the post-Westphalian order, international order, maybe is it cannot ignore the persistence of some of the mainstays of the Westphalian order. For a start, there is unequal distribution of power to consider. And within this context, it is fitting to ask what is actually new discourse of humanitarian intervention. Richard Falk is another important political scientist who tells us that are we dealing mainly with a change in discursive reality such that what has mainly changed in language, not behavior, with major states still remaining on the behavioral level a discretionary option to the use of force. So if you see very clearly, what are the theorists trying to tell you here is that there is an extraordinary inequality of power in international relations, and there is might is right or the rule of the jungle. And based on this, most of the powerful countries are the ones who can help you intervene. So in this new international humanitarian order, formalized and regulated by the United Nations, and the right to intervene on the pretext of removing particular government, which so and this is exercised not in consultation with the country that you're trying to intervene in. It is being done unilaterally by the country that sponsors the humanitarian intervention, and most cases you need it today, United States of America, what we call Pax Americana. Now history teaches and demonstrates that power structures, no matter how long-lived, are never immutable, and that slowly or rapidly such structures change, metamorphose, or disappear altogether. The Westphalian legacy did not bequeath us any determined institutional model. It only opened horizons. With the loss of absolute and exclusive state-centeredness, the post-Westphalian order is one of constant innovations and experimentation. The notions of power, political structures, and international dynamics underlined by the losing validity of traditional definitions of power is purely military and political terms. The unpredictability of the new international order, or more appropriately its constant making and remaking, may be in different ways a challenge to international relations. Now, what are the possibilities? What forms would the post-Westphalian world order, with its belief in maneuverability and infinitely open space, take? So here Sutter has put forward 4 cogent future possibilities. Meaning, what type of order can we have? Okay, we have given up bipolarity, the Cold War, the Westphalian state. Now what? First, a continuation of the current international order that is termed as steady state. Meaning, though we call it the post-Westphalian order, in features, very little changes. Second, greater international cooperation through a strengthened United Nations. We call it a world state. Third, a continued decline of the national governments, with economies being run by transnational corporations. We term it as earth insurance. And fourth, a breakdown of nation states and of transnational corporations, resulting in national and international chaos. And this is called the wild state. Upon reflection, each of the 4 predictions is capable of its realization. Now there is a huge opposition that comes in to globalization. The developing world and the national and ethnic identities are not the only groups. Labor and environmental groups are also very critical of globalization. Economic globalization involves a spread of a global consumer culture that embodies a worldwide worldview unconcerned with the ecological consequences of human economic activity. So the contention is this may homogenize the world, globalization, and there is a cry for a celebration of diversity. So people say the globalized world order can be a multiplex order. What do we mean by a multiplex order? We mean that it is decentered. There is no global hegemon or Western hegemony, but instead there are many powers. Diverse. It is less US and Western centric than the liberal world order, more global in scope and inclusive. Complex. There are multiple and overlapping levels of government, while the government is itself interconnected and interdependent. And finally, you have pluralistic. There are many actors or agents, not just states. Power, ideas, influence are worldly, are diffused. Now, what is the transformation in politics because of globalization? One, there's a conceptual shift, meaning you're thinking of new ideas, new paradigms, and new ways of seeing the world. Second, from state-centric international politics to geocentric global politics. From the liberal world order to the post-Western global order, and from intergovernmentalism to global governance. And here if you see, there are contentious global politics. It's imbued with significant, despite all globalization, everything, there are problems. One, inequalities of power, information, opportunity and capabilities. Globalization is not leading to the demise of the sovereign state, but rather to the transformation of sovereign statehood. Global governance is associated with the reconfiguration of the power and authority of national governments. So if you see very clearly in this whole globalization chapter, we have tried to understand the concept at different levels and what have been the consequences and at what level there have been opportunities as well as challenges, and how does international relations writing currently look upon globalization. Thank you so much. See you for the next lecture.